I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. On today's episode of Leadovation Podcast, we explore why change fails and what actually works instead. We talk about behavioral science that helped reverse type 2 diabetes in just 12 weeks, and how tiny steps with fast feedback beat big overhauls, and the 3 causes of conflict that derail teams: goals, values, and style. We also dig into a bold idea: AI belongs on the org chart. Let's dig in. John, it's great to have you on the show. You've got so much of a background that I don't even quite know where to start, quite frankly, because we could talk about so many different things. But would you just sort of set the table a little bit for all of us here? I mean, we can read the show notes and all that, but tell us about who you are, what do you do, and what inspires you right now?
I tell this story a lot of different times. So I'm going to take a brand new angle that I really haven't shared before. And
Okay.
that was this. I have a well-publicized car wreck that happened in 2007 in my life. And before that car wreck, I was highly transactional at work. I wouldn't have said that at the time. I would have said that I care about people. But subconsciously, the truth is, it was always, what can you do for me? If I do this for you and I help you, how will that help me? If I do this, there was always that kind of subconscious calculation. But after that car wreck, my whole life changed. And I decided that I wanted to really have great relationships that I hadn't had up to that point in my life. And so I worked really, really hard to figure out what it meant to have great relationships personally and professionally, and what were the things that I was missing and why was I missing those things in my life. And then how could I take that out to the world and try to help people find the connection, people who wanted it, that I was so desperately hungry for. And it showed up in ways, positive and negative before that. But, it's like before that time, I have friends that I keep up with from high school and college, but don't really keep up with. After that time, I have lifelong friends that were like family. Like we chose each other shortly after that, and have, our families are really super close. And so, So one quick moment of like clarity, and it changed. It was a skill set, not a talent for me. I had to work very hard at it, but what were the things I was missing to kind of move my life in a way that I was much more excited about?
So was the car wreck life or death? I mean, were you really seriously looking at the other side? I mean, were you at that point like, I could be dead now?
Yeah, I mean, I spun on black ice to avoid hitting somebody broadside who had also spun on black ice, and ended up going down a 40 or 50 foot embankment, and then off of a 40 or 50 foot wall in my car. And so straight down 50 feet. And so in that
Oof.
40 foot embankment and off the 50 feet, I knew this was going to be really, really, really bad. And the short story is I walked away from the accident with not hardly a scratch. And
Wow.
so it was a real reset for me.
And so how does this then translate into the work that you now do? You've got you're a doctor. Connect some dots for us.
Yeah. So from there, I went out and I had some career changes that happened, and I was very interested in, behavioral science and psychology. And I got into the consulting world and got pretty deep into like change management for organizations for a long time. And then I went back and got my doctorate. Years later, I went back and got a doctorate in social work. And I really wanted to learn what behaviors could we help change to reverse type 2 diabetes. And we had a pilot study where we studied 50 patients who were really sick, very low income, very low access to medical care. And we reversed diabetes in 49 out of 50 patients. So 98% of them reversed diabetes in 12 weeks, and then kept those people out of diabetic, in control, really. So for the next 2 years. And so and then we've, since then we were about to publish another paper on the process, and it's going really well. We've essentially reversed type 2 diabetes for people who are really, really sick. have been, had diabetes for decades in some cases. And it's the same behavioral science that I was using for change management of organizations early in my career, that we applied directly to problems in medicine. And no surprise,
Mm.
we're seeing that it works.
Okay, so let's just call out here real quickly here that I understand this. Want to make sure that everybody's listening to this understands this. Is that type 2 diabetes is something that can be prevented based on lifestyle choices. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's some kind of genetic component, but by and large, not everyone, but generally speaking, if you eat well and you exercise regularly and do the things that, we know are the appropriate things to do, type 2 diabetes can be put into what the NIH is now calling remission.
Mm,
And so it's, yeah, so we can absolutely do that. But we've known that for decades, right? That's not new information. So the
right.
question I had was, if we know all this, why isn't it happening?
Well, we can get into a whole conversation about the pharmaceutical companies and so forth, and insurance companies who would like us to continue to be healthy, to be sick or partially sick, so that we continue to purchase their wares and so forth. But that's another
Well, that's
conversation.
an answer, but I would push back pretty hard and say that's, while it even may be true, I might even grant you that for the sake of the conversation. There are
Yeah,
things we can do as individuals, even given an environment that's difficult to succeed in. Our
totally.
patients, by and large, succeed every single day, under resourced, and we give them answers that they say things like, "I've never heard this in 20 or 30 years. Why haven't I heard this?"
Okay, so let's map this then. So you're
Yeah,
saying basically change management, behavior understanding. Um, your work has been able to result in some real positive outcomes when it comes to type 2 diabetes.
yeah,
You're also saying that same process, if I remember hearing you say, can also be applied in other situations, other systems, like in terms of organizations and so forth, organizational change. So map it if you could. What did you have? What happened, and how did you facilitate the change for individuals to be able to get the result from diabetes?
yeah.
That what was the process? Because there is obviously we all know change is tough. The brain likes to stay the same. We even like to stay the same even if we know consciously or even unconsciously that it's not good for us, right? We're creatures of habit. How this is sort of like the golden goose, right? And you solve this, you solve a lot of stuff. What did you do? How did you do it to be able to get these results on the behavioral side for diabetes?
That's the right question. First, I went out and in my research found everything that was happening today. Like, what's everything we've tried? Because you need to know what the whole world looks like. And once we decided, okay, we have a pretty good handle on everything that's been tried and failed, and we know that in the clinic, in a laboratory setting, a lot of these things work individually, but they're not working out in the wild. So what's happening? And so I deconstructed all of the things that were happening kind of in terms of the medicine that was happening, what was happening in terms of the behavioral health. We also looked into some non-clinical factors, things that are not typically measured in, behavioral health or in medicine. And then we layered on top of all of that a patient's readiness for change. So a social work term to kind of determine where somebody is in that, phased approach to being ready to change. And then we imagine the entire clinical approach from medical practice, a clinical therapy practice, but then we also looked at the entire administrative practice inside of medicine. So we really kind of broke everything down to its component parts and then rebuilt the entire experience to solve for chronic metabolic disease. So we talk about our success with type 2 diabetes, but we're already seeing similar success with cardiovascular disease. We're already seeing similar success with pulmonary disease because these things all kind of have the same root cause in what we're calling chronic metabolic disease. That's not a term we coined, but certainly we're going to use it. And so, how do you look at all the medicine, all the behavior, and the behavior that you and I talked about right before we got on was eating well and exercising, and how do you get those things right? In what order? In what size of steps do you take? And the things I'm going to say aren't that shocking. We meet people right where they are. So every single person's got a different approach based on exactly where they are in the problem set. And then we make
Hmm.
very, very tiny changes with very, very short feedback loops. And these feedback loops are hours long, not days or weeks long.
So that's interesting. So what if your assessment in the change readiness process is we're not ready for change? Do you leave it alone or you come back later? I mean, what happens when somebody just shows up as I'm just not ready for change?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, most people who show up in that area are ready to change something. They may not want to change exactly the optimal thing for from the provider's perspective. And then there's tools you can use appropriately in a clinical setting, motivational interviewing being kind of the most well kind of publicized one of those tools to help people kind of move down the right path in a clinically appropriate way. But sometimes you just need people to understand what's going on. So I'll give you a real world example. Patient came in very, very sick. They needed dialysis, and they said, "I don't want to take insulin. I don't want dialysis, and I just that's it." And so, without insulin, without dialysis, they were going to be dead in 60 days. And so, they escalated up to my desk, and I called the patient, and I was just very supportive. I was like, I said, the doctor said, the physician said, you don't want to take insulin. They said, that's correct. I said, okay, I'm a social worker. I support you. They said, that's great. I said, I also understand you don't want dialysis. They said, I don't. I said, great. I support that too. Like, well, Dr. Oberg, this is great. I said, awesome. I do need to get you a referral to a palliative care doctor and an estate lawyer to make sure that your affairs are in order. And they're like, what's that? I said, well, that's the doctor you talk to when you're going to die in 60 days, because 60 days from now, if you don't take insulin and if you don't get dialysis, you're going to be dead whether you like it or not. And so you can choose A, insulin, B, dialysis, or C, palliative care, but not choosing the world will choose for you. And they're like, well, wait a second. Wait, what? And it's like, I'm not trying to, like, I will support whichever path you want to be on. I just want to help your family. And they, of course, they invited their daughter into the conversation appropriately. And by the end, what it came down to is this: they were really scared of, they didn't want the commitment to dialysis, and they were really scared of injecting themselves with insulin. And I said,
Hmm.
no problem. What if we had insulin in your house later today? We, got someone to get it to you, whatever the case may be. And what if we got onto a video call and we actually had a provider just walk you through the steps in your home, do it with you. They're like, you could do that? It's like, oh, yeah, we could definitely do that. So we
Hmm.
got the prescription. They had the prescription delivered. We had a provider that was on the video with them to inject for the first few injections to get them comfortable. Their family members got trained to help them out. But we really had to meet them where they are and help them get over those hurdles. And that's now the story I'm giving you is one of the most like hyperbolic stories we have to tell in our clinic. But we have people that, we measure hemoglobin A1C to measure diabetes. We're getting results that are, 5 to 20 times more effective than medicine alone by helping people take it the right way.
All right, so I'm writing down some notes here based on what you just said, and tell me if I have this right. And I really am curious about what your change management model is, because it sounds like if it can be applied in a medical environment, it can be applied elsewhere.
Sure.
That's where I think we're, excuse me, where we're going with this. I heard a sort of a readiness for change, assessing that. Two is meet people where they're at. Number three, I think I picked up give them some small feedback loops, real time. Four was
Radically incremental steps, like radically incremental.
so not small. When you mean radically?
Radically incremental would mean like, we may change someone's insulin prescription every 3 days if we have enough data and it's clinically indicated. So if someone's
Okay.
medicine isn't working for them, we will change it very quickly to help them make it work for them.
Okay. But you also got a piece of my words, not yours, sort of like a hold the mirror up of reality. Meaning, would you like to do this or would you like us to talk to a palliative
Well,
care for, is that
again,
part of your
that
process?
that
Or
was the
that just
most
sort of
no,
happened in that
no. That
situation?
look, they'd already been escalated through my entire team. They'd talked to our clinical therapists, they'd talked to our medical doctors. We knew there was a really big problem, so they got escalated to my like that's a pretty rare circumstance. Like
Okay.
that is it's a true story. It's a great story, but I would call that unusual.
All right. All right. So then what is the model, John, that can be applied in a medical situation if it can, as well as in a non-medical situation? Like somebody's listening to this and say, "This sounds
Yeah.
interesting, but I'm not a doctor. I want to know how I can essentially affect change and change behavior in what appears to be a fairly transactional world in which we live."
Yeah, I think so. What we, if you look at the TED talk that I did, we talk about a few things. One is having an expert involved because having a plan doesn't make it a good plan. So you've got to have the expert involved to tell you that it's a good plan. And you've got to have the person who's going to execute the plan involved so that you know they're actually committed to doing it, right? Because, if I'm the expert and you're the person who's going to execute the plan, and I'm like, hey, you should do this, and you say, well, I'm not willing to do that, it's a terrible plan, right?
Mhm.
Or if you don't involve the expert and then you have a plan that's not going to work, that's also a terrible plan.
But if I have an expert involved in the plan, it goes without saying I'm gonna have to trust the expert. What if I don't trust the expert?
Well, then they're not a good expert for you. Like you have to have,
Okay.
so there is
Credible expert for the person.
yeah, I think you have to have that relationship between the expert and the person. And then you've
Yeah,
got the expert has to be smart enough to make the plan reasonable enough and motivating enough. In other words, people do things for their own reasons. Dean is not
right.
going to do things for John's reasons. Dean's going to do things for Dean's reasons, and until we understand that as a provider, we're going to be
Hmm.
less effective. So it's really about having the right plan, both for the person executing it and also from the expert's point of view, right? But as an expert, I oftentimes come in and someone's like, "Well, I'm going to go." I'm going to go lower my blood sugar. I'm going to cut sugar out of my diet. I'm only going to eat bread.
Hmm.
It's like, well, bread is sugar. Like so
Right.
so having the expert kind of point, like, hey, great idea. Directionally, love the attitude. Need to talk about what actually needs to be happening here. But if you take too big a chance, like I tell my providers all the time, if someone's eating sugar cereal every morning for breakfast, and your answer is start eating kale and carrots, that's too far. We had another patient who came in who they had some early stage dementia, but they were only eating ice cream and drinking chocolate milk, and that was their only caloric intake. Their spouse couldn't get them to take anything else. So we
Oh my.
literally said, "Can we just change the type of ice cream?" They're like, "Oh, sure, we can do that." So we changed the type of ice cream, and their fasting blood sugar was reduced by 100 points in the first week, and that
Wow.
gave us the trust to then take the next one small step.
All right. So let's relate this into a non-medical situation. Let's
Yeah, sure.
say there's God, this comes up a lot for me in conversation. So I was just having a change management discussion with a COO of a healthcare organization. Let's say I am CEO of a relatively new startup organization that it's got some venture capital backing and it's been told that it needs to really scale on a national level and this is going to move a lot of people's cheese within my company and a lot of people are going to need to take on different roles, maybe take on two roles as we ramp up and it feels like maybe the old us is no longer around. Now we're becoming too corporate. We're growing from a smaller organization to something much larger. This is just an example here.
Yeah,
Can
yeah.
you provide some insight into how might we motivate change given your experience in the healthcare world or elsewhere and being really into behavior change? What's a process that a person like that should think about as they take a company through massive growth and change?
Yeah, so I think starting by understanding what causes conflict is probably the most important thing. And so conflict is only caused by three things in the world, right? Conflict is caused by a change, like a difference in goals, or a difference in value systems, or a difference in style. And so I don't care if you're talking about organizational change management, or marriage, or the Middle East peace conflict, like it's only one or more of those three things: goals, style, values, right? And so if I'm leading an organization through change, what I want to do is say, hey, core values are already established, right? So that hopefully is not part of the conversation. Get really level set on the goals and then stylistically try to meet the person where they are and say, look, here's where we're headed. I got a few ideas about how we get there, but you tell me how we get there. And then just get them moving, inertia, right? Get them moving in the right direction. And so maybe don't try to solve the entire problem all at once. Just solve for getting people moving in a direction. And that seems like a whole lot of hard work where it's like, oh man, I've got to check in with people that many times. And the answer is, yeah, it takes a lot more energy on the front end to do it that way, and a lot less energy on the back end, and a lot less energy overall if you're willing to invest on the front end of change management.
So most of the time when organizations go through massive change, it's kind of a top-down approach. The C-suite gets together and decides we're going to do something, and then they try to go and implement it. What you're sort of suggesting is something much more personal, like almost key people are being met with other key people to adjust style, which you just mentioned, to be cognizant of the other person's style. Because if you could roll out a whole change management process in a certain style, well, some people are going to love it, and some people are not because everyone's got a different style. I mean, are you suggesting a
Yeah.
more
So
specific approach, or
when I coach CEOs through change, I say, look, you need to understand, like, of all your key people, how is the change going to impact them? So you know if and when to have the conversation with them. So that's one piece of it, right?
okay,
And just be thoughtful about how it's going to impact people. Some of those people you are going to talk to beforehand. Some of those people, for reasons you're not able to talk to beforehand, that's just a reality. And
right?
and you know, if you have great trust with your organization, I remember a time early in my career where I had a couple of people that were going through a tough period with me. It was a few days, and I was like, hey, look, there's going to be a period of 48, 72 hours where I can't really explain what's happening because things are moving so fast. I need you to stick with me. And then at 5 o'clock every day, we're going to take 30 minutes and I'll answer whatever questions I can. But I'm just going to be kind of a taskmaster for the next 48 hours. And I need you to trust me, stick with me. And here's the key: give them a venue or a place they can come to talk to you confidentially to ask those questions where you can give the answers that you can give. And
Mm,
and they'll hopefully respect that sometimes you can't give all the answers. I had someone earlier today in healthcare ask me a very direct question about a situation that I have an answer to. I'm on the board of directors for an organization. I said, hey, that's a great question. It's a fair question. I have the answer and I can't give it to you because I have a non-disclosure agreement for that particular thing inside the organization. And you need to know, when I tell you that our conversations are confidential, I take that really seriously, as I do with
mm.
everyone that I talk to. So I'm going to ask you to trust me. And I have the capital built up that they do.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, are there certain sort of behaviors that you've noticed in organizations that really derail this whole process? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, I think I talk just professionally from a relationship perspective. I talk about like accountability and responsibility are like the foundation that you stand on to build skills for relationship. And then, the skills you build are around things like trustworthiness. So the thing I just talked about, holding someone's secrets appropriately, appropriately being the key word there, right? Vulnerability, appropriate vulnerability in the workplace, right? Acceptance, and I think radical acceptance for a leader is super important to understand what the whole landscape looks like. Honestly, I think some leaders get kind of rose-colored glasses on and they see the landscape as they wish it would be instead of the landscape as it actually is, and that's a much
Mm,
harder landscape to drive through. And so when you have all of that, so you have vulnerability appropriate, you have acceptance that's appropriate, and trustworthiness, then if you can see people in their best light, again, where it's appropriate, you're going to start to build really healthy relationships, right? And then when you have all that, it's very easy to navigate as a team through change rather than doing it in like a low trust environment. And so I think so that's
mm.
the skill set that I would hope people build up over time. So that when you have those tense moments, everyone knows they're pulling the same direction.
Yeah. So, if we could dig into like the brain here and its ability to manage change, and if in some ways we're sort of built um, from the perspective of we can only handle so much change at a certain amount of time. We get tired, fatigued. The brain can only process so much information. We got terabytes of information coming at us all the time. It's like if we were to actually absorb all this information, all this change, we would probably go completely insane. So, what is happening in the brain that causes us to resist change? Number one. And what do we do differently that causes the brain to say, I can adapt to change?
Well, hold on, I want to back up because the way you just said it would indicate that like everybody has the same kind of
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and
correct me then. Yeah, make it
yeah, and so
happen. Yeah.
there's broadly speaking, there's about, let's just call it 15-18% of the people in the US that are much more excited about change. They think in terms of change. They want
Mm.
change. They
From a
lean into
stylistic
change.
perspective, yes.
Yeah, and,
Right.
and so now those people might they might actually occupy 50 or 80% of the executive roles at corporations in our country. And so you have this kind of smaller group that sits at a place where they sit in leadership roles, where first line managers are like the opposite side of that map, right? They're the ones that want stability and peace.
Right.
And so they have a way of like keeping the water calm. And so, that's like, let's call it 26% of the population, something like that. My numbers are off a little bit, but they might have 70 or 80% of the first line management roles, which was appropriate for a middle manager and entry level manager. And so really you have this stylistic kind of bent toward, like, I don't mind change. I'm pretty comfortable with it. I have friends who are incredibly like prone to change. Like they will change things for the sake of change.
Right.
Makes me a little uncomfortable sometimes, but that's that,
Yeah.
they love that world. And then I have other friends who just don't like the word change causes anxiety, right? And so I think we all have this different kind of um, behavioral approach to change. And so again, the thing you said a minute ago, meeting people where they are, it's very
Hmm.
important. And I believe that the leader in the organization has a responsibility to the best of their ability to meet people where they are. And then the employee should do their best job to meet the leader where they are. But I think that's a great relationship. Both people trying to meet people all the way where they are, not two people trying to meet in the middle. Two people trying to meet in the middle tend to just fall apart.
So you made a very important point, and I agree with you 100% that everybody's got a different appetite for change. Um, and that being said, how do we then effectively help somebody change when their style is not to do that, when you have an adverse reaction to change? I was
Yeah.
just talking to my son over the weekend, and he calls me up and he says, "Dad, are you having a midlife crisis? What's going on?" I says, "Why do you ask?" He goes, "Because you got a new car and a new dog all in the same day." And I said, "Yeah, well, that's just what mom and I do once in a while. We just shake things up a bit." He goes, "But I knew it was because there was so much change that come at him."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's not a change guy, right?
Yeah.
His appetite is much, much less than mine. I can handle it a lot more. So how do you help a person who is, from a stylistic perspective, just not thrown to be about creating change in their life?
Yeah, I think that goes back to those smaller changes, right? To the extent that that a business can afford to have somebody make those smaller changes, that's appropriate. Also, sometimes, I tell people this all the time. There are times that companies grow on a curve faster than the person, and that
Hmm.
generally leads to a change in staff. And so I think making sure that you're in the right role today doesn't mean that same role is going to be the right role for you tomorrow. And we've got a world that's changing today quickly. And so, like,
Yeah.
I think one of the hottest topics around this is AI. And so, like, uh, is AI going to replace people? I don't think so. Are people using AI going to replace people who aren't using AI? Like, that's a real risk. I think that,
Mm,
and you're seeing it in the job market already. So,
right. Well, you made a point earlier, though, John, that there was a comment you made about the C-suite is probably going to inhabit more change-hungry individuals than, say, those who are the operators who have to go and execute against that change. Now, here's a scenario that I'm sure we all can agree with. We can see that all the time. You got a mid-level manager. They've done extremely well being the executor of other people's change. The organization is growing. So we say, okay, thank you very much. We're going to give you a pat on the back. We're going to now promote you up a level or two. So now, instead of being the operator who's doing all the nuts and bolts work, we want you to be more the coordinator, the
yeah,
strategist,
yeah,
the
yeah,
creator of other change. And
yeah,
then we go, well, okay, they've done well. Let's assess them on that. Let's give them that promotion. And they sometimes struggle. So could
yeah.
you talk about that's a real situation that happens all the time. We don't necessarily have the staff, the talent to say, sorry, person, we can't give you a promotion because we know that you're not change ready. We're just going to
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
bring you up. How do you
Well,
deal with that reality?
and I don't want to leave your listener with the impression that you have to be one type of leader or the other, because there are all types of leaders
Understood.
in the C-suite. And so,
Sure.
and I'm not aware of any causal relationship there. That's just a correlation that I pointed out earlier, right? However, in those roles, first line manager, director level, vice presidential level, C-suite, I wrote a paper on this for my clients years ago that talked about the differences in those job descriptions. And, being a basketball player has a different job description than being a basketball coach. And if you're
Mm.
unclear about that, go look at Michael Jordan, arguably the best basketball player of all time, arguably the worst basketball coach of all time. Right
Hmm.
now, there are people who can do both. Phil Jackson, who coached Michael Jordan, was a
Hmm.
great basketball player and a great basketball coach. However, one does not necessarily lead to the other. So just because you're a great accountant doesn't mean you're going to be a great manager of accountants.
Right.
Management is a skill set. And first line management has one set of skills. Being a director has a different level of skill. Being a vice president has a different level of skill. And each of those skills are discrete. You can go learn those job descriptions if you're deliberate about learning those things. And so my guidance to people who want to have an executive, job description is to learn executive skills. And you can't skip through from management to director to executive. You need to learn those different skill sets. And I do believe that the executive skill set of the future is changing. I think that if you're not thinking about your org chart in terms of how AI is playing into that at that vice presidential and C-suite level, I think you're going to hurt yourself.
All right. So you said a lot right there. Unpack that a little bit. So how is
Sure.
AI affecting the C-suite that it didn't before?
I think in my company, AI shows up on the org chart right now. So we literally are treating AI similar to how we would look at interns of the past and how to get interns using AI to manage AI and to manage processes. And so before, where you had individuals that were working processes, now you have what used to be a first line contributor managing a process because AIs are doing the work. And you have someone who's now a first line worker doing analytical work in jobs that weren't previously analytical. It was just do the work.
So literally on an org chart, you would have a box or a square or a diamond or whatever your particular acronym would be or your diagram would be is AI, and that's a function. That's what they're doing. That's what their
That's
job
right.
description is.
That's right. Yeah.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Okay, good. Well, then what about though, you mentioned the fact that, management skills is something that can be taught. It sounds like the backbone of what that management skill that is being taught is change management. It's not
I
just
mean, no, I don't. I don't think that's true. I think for the first
no.
line
All right.
manager, I think you got to know how to get the right people in the right seat from a recruitment perspective. I
Sure.
think have to give basic training. I think you have to know the difference between training someone for a job and coaching them. So training is teaching them something brand new. Coaching them is identifying why it's not working, how to fix it. I think you've got
Right.
to learn how to motivate people and hold them accountable. Like those five skills for most managers frontline are just needed. And so now when you get into being a director of an organization, now you're trying to improve processes. But as a frontline manager, you generally don't change processes without somebody's help. You generally have a director who's coming in and changing those processes. Then as a vice president, again, I'm speaking in very broad terms, as a vice president, you might be writing new processes. You might be driving AI into the business. Like you're just thinking more strategically, and so that's the way I. And again, I've got a lot more that I've written about this. Like I'm happy to share with you, but
Yeah.
it really is run the process, fix the process, create the process. That's the highest, most general terms I can kind of make it.
So go bring us back to your car accident then. You've
Yeah,
had this sort of a wake up call about being more less transactional, I think is what you said, more connected.
yeah.
Is this this whole work that you're doing, tell me how the change management, I'm making the assumption, the work that you're doing is in a sense the byproduct or part of that whole process is to connect people. It's to create more of that hope, more of that connection that maybe we have somewhat lost in our society or because of
Yeah.
AR and COVID, we're now spending more time, in our homes versus out connecting with people, all the other stuff, the depression rates are going up, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the tie-in for you?
I mean, that if someone said, past your family and your faith, like what's the mark you want to leave on the world? It's a more
Yeah.
connected world because of the work that I did. I think that's the real, like, at the end of the day, loneliness is considered the most important epidemic from, the Surgeon General's perspective.
Yes.
And, I can't find the study, but there was a guy with a PhD who gave me, this is 20 years ago. He said in the 60s, men had 12 men they could talk to about anything from and today that number's like less than three. And
Right.
again, the numbers are directional. I can't find the study, but it certainly fits with the loneliness epidemic and all the things you just mentioned. And so like, How do we reverse that? How do we create, spaces where people can have real conversation, real relationship that is, personal in some cases, professionally appropriate in other cases? Like that's the thing and we have to know how to do that, because showing up at work and vomiting everything you tell your best friend isn't necessarily appropriate, right? And then being totally cold and transactional isn't necessarily helpful either. So what's the right balance? And that's really what we
Yeah.
talk to people about every day.
I'm just curious what your thought is. Because what it made me think about, John, as you were saying this, is that the very act for some people, and I could even put myself in this based on how my mood might be, to go out and connect with somebody, hence your comment about loneliness, feels like change that I don't want to take on, even though maybe I know it's the right
Hmm.
thing to do.
Yeah,
The isolation, the loneliness sort of becomes its own, I don't know, enterprise.
yeah,
And that the change to be able to connect feels like work or feels somehow uncomfortable for us. I remember coming out of COVID,
yeah,
I was working with this team and they were saying, this exercise, Dean, that you're doing with us 3 years ago, we would have been happy to do it. But now
yeah.
it scares the shit out of us because we got to be vulnerable. We got to connect. Our muscle of connectivity is flabby.
You're not wrong. I mean, and you're describing, that the healthy tension that exists when we grow, right? And so, people talk about being stressed out, and I like to get people to get really clear about what kind of stress. There's eustress, EUSTRESS, and there's distress, right?
Mm.
Eustress is healthy. That means something's building. Distress means something's getting hurt, right? So
Mm.
when I go to the gym to build muscle, that would be like, it's not called eustress, but that would be physical eustress, right?
Right.
And when I break my bone, that's distress, right? So we want muscle building, we don't want broken bones. And so, but I gotta tell you, it doesn't feel good to be at the gym some days. Like it hurts.
Yeah.
It's out of my
No.
comfort zone, right?
Right.
And I think that's true for our emotional kind of gas tank too. And so getting that exercise emotionally makes us stronger and better and helps us go deeper. And it's really important. Like if we're going to age well, we have to age well physically. That's an obvious one. Cognitively, there's a lot of talk about that. But we've got to age well emotionally too.
Yeah, and there's also, what about just the simple idea that, yeah, you're right. It doesn't feel good to go to the gym sometimes. You're sore, you're tired, whatever, but your willpower, your grit causes you to do it, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that part of this as well? Like, yes, you might be resistant to change. Yes, this might cause you some discomfort, but that doesn't mean you should do it.
Yeah. And for me, it's about community. Like me going to the gym alone, almost never. Me going to the
Yeah.
gym with someone else, almost every time. Like I have to trick myself into it sometimes. So I guess what I would say
Mm.
is like community matters, I think, in the
Yeah.
world in ways that sometimes we underestimate. But like the whole go it alone, like think about all the things we pay
Mm.
for as services in our society today that communities just did for each other years past. Like,
Right.
look, my one of my sons, he goes to one of his sports workouts at a private lesson and takes an Uber. But when I was a kid, it was a carpool. It took more
Yeah.
energy to set it like, but there was no Uber. There's my mom had carpool. And so
Yeah.
so I think community is being put off to the side and being commercialized sometimes in a way that may not be the most helpful.
No, I think you're so right on. Man, we could talk about what it was like when I grew up. I mean, everything was with
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
I got super into skiing for a while and I thought that was what I was going to do. And when everybody went off to college and I was still doing the ski racing and went like, I realized the whole point of skiing wasn't so much,
Yeah.
hitting gates. It was being with my buddies. It was the whole
Yeah. Yeah.
community thing. I was like, I felt so, let
I just,
down. Like, my
my
love
wife
of
and I
skiing became changed all of a sudden. Yeah.
my wife and I were inspired by a book called Die with Zero, and then we read Outlive by Peter Attia. And I was like, what things do we want to be doing together in our old age? And I had AI make this list of like 300 things to evaluate whether or not they were important to our life. And like knitting was a no, but hiking was a yes. What I
Huh.
realized is that like almost everything on my list, it was like +1 if I was with my wife, right? So it was a 4 if I did it alone. With my wife, it was a 5, right? And
Yeah.
so, like, in almost any activity, like, I would be willing to do almost anything in the world if my friends or my family are involved.
You really hit it. I think that's one of the big themes of this conversation, at least I'm coming away with. This whole process around change is so much easier when we do it with other people.
That's right.
And it also kind of, it doesn't mitigate it completely, but it certainly moves us away from that tendency that you talked about with our Surgeon General around loneliness and isolation.
Yeah.
You do it together.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier, and it's actually kind of fun sometimes.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, John, tell us more about, you got a podcast, you got a book, you've got some stuff that you're up to. I'm sure some people would love to sort of find out more about you. How can they do that?
I'd say come check me out on LinkedIn, connect with me, come to talesofabundance.com and listen to some stories of hope from our podcast, or check out the diabetes practice at Precina.com, Precina. Check out Precina.com. But I'm happy to connect with anybody. Reach out, and I'm happy to take a call and grab, virtual coffee, whatever. But if you're interested in getting connected, I'm in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening to Leadovation with Dean Newland. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadovation.